Okay, so welcome everybody. It's 2 o'clock or maybe 7 p.m. in London if you're overseas. Welcome to our webinar for the week. My name is Chris Ajemian and I'm the CEO and founder of Kate's Tutoring and Educational Services. And this week we're talking about a pretty hot topic, which is college research online. I'll be joined today by my good friend Michael Muska. But before we get started, I want to first say we hope that you're well, that you and your family are safe and healthy and managing the coronavirus crisis a-okay. So I am joined today by Michael Muska. Michael's one of my very best friends and mentors. He's a guru in college admissions and someone who's really seen it from all sides, working at universities, including Brown, as well as Oberlin and Cornell, as well as working at different high schools, whether it's the Phillips Andover or EF Academy or Poly Prep Country Day School. And he's also one of the most highly touted college track and field coaches and used to run the Ivy League track and field championships. Michael and I have presented before and we're very lucky to have him. Michael, how you doing? Oh, Michael, you're muted. I can't hear you. There you go. There you go. There you go.
All right, good. I'm happy to be here with you, Chris. Looking forward to having our conversation just like we did last time and, giving these people a lot of good information.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for your time. We know it's valuable and we really appreciate you sharing your insights today. For anyone who's been on our webinars before, it'll be standard procedure. If you're brand new to the experience, we recommend that you put your computer or your Zoom platform on gallery view so you can see our faces sort of side by side as we share, as well as going into either the top of your Zoom platform and selecting side by side mode so Michael and I can appear side by side as we share the slides. So a couple of things. Here's today's discussion. We talked about how to use online research, demonstrate interest. We'll talk about do's and don'ts of virtual tours and info sessions, checklists for website research, as well as do's and don'ts of social media, how to connect with colleges, and also we'll do a Q&A. And just to make sure that we've got everything all organized, we're going to just make sure that we have this all set. Okay, great, terrific. So we're gonna have a Q&A session, but if you do have questions at some point during the presentation, or if you wanna discuss like a private question, you can always call or email us. We do have a Q&A panel that you can use during the session. And there's a Q&A panel, there's also a chat panel in your interface. And please put your questions into the Q&A and we'll get to them as we can. Okay, great. So again, if you need to contact one of us, there's our information. And before we dive into this, Michael, we have a lot of people on today's call that are sort of new to this and they were not around for the talk that we did when we started seeing a lot of the information coming from schools on COVID-19. And I would love for you to kind of give us like a quick sort of recap and also update. And would love for you to do it within the context of what at least the people who I trust consider to be the 5 most important pieces of information and criteria that admissions officers really use to evaluate. So number 1, what's going on with academics. Number 2, what's going on with testing. 3, how are schools looking at or thinking about or talking about extracurriculars, so your resume. Then recommendations as well as the essay. Those are the 5 criteria. Again, academics, testing, resume, recommendations, and essays, and then maybe 5.5, that being the interview. So love to hear your thoughts on what's going on right now, just to kind of get everyone in the same context so they can make the most of the information we'll share today about online research.
Sure, I'll give you in 2 parts. I think the first part is just a very quick, for any family right now dealing with the May 1st deadline, to be thinking about what's going on with that. And many things that happen on May 1st in terms of where people deposit, what schools do in terms of deferring students, is going to impact the next class. So a lot of what's going on right now, and in the next month or so, we're going to know a lot more about schools opening in the fall, what's happening in terms of those situations. And Chris and I will come back and do another session to talk more about that in the next month or so. But I think as you think ahead right now in terms of students today, back to what Chris just highlighted, academics, clearly when colleges look at students' junior year grades, there's going to be some concern in terms of looking at it. Schools in New York have just recently said, we're going to allow students to have grades and we're going to allow students to have pass-fail. So what's going to happen is colleges are going to look at that and make a decision. But it's going to vary from school to school. Private schools in New York are very much going to pass-fail. Some are still hanging on to grades. So again, each school is going to be looked at differently. The more the information that your high school can provide colleges on what you did in that second half of the year, perhaps in a write-up, the recommendation, the blurb, the teacher recommendations, those are ways that you can really give a message to the college of what went on. Testing, Chris, you're the expert on it, but in many ways, we're starting to see some real changes. Schools that would never talked about being test optional are now saying perhaps for a year, we're going to look at this. Tufts is looking at it as a 3-year experiment. Cornell has said that they're going to do it for a year or so. I think we're going to see more schools as they see the unavailability of testing for some students, particularly for a lot of international students, that they're going to have to make some decisions relative or not what you can do in terms of a testing. So I think that students who do have test scores, however, that are very strong will be at an advantage because it's never going to hurt them to have strong test scores. So clearly, if the opportunity is there to take them advantage of them if you can. In terms of a resume, sports are canceled, clubs are canceled, kids that were getting ready for plays, unfortunately can't do those. And so what a resume is going to look at is going to be very different in terms of what schools looked at in the past. And we always argued that junior year is most important. I saw a girl the other day online lamenting the fact that she lost her track season, so she couldn't run the times so that some college would recruit her. And these are realities of the times in terms of what goes on. So again, the more that you can present of what you've done, perhaps how you used your time right now during the COVID-19 period, and also what you anticipate doing once we get back up to score, great. But we may not still have some sports in the fall. There's lots of conversations whether college or high school football will even be played in the fall, depending on what happens with the COVID. Obviously, recommendations I mentioned before, teachers, key. Teachers who talk about what you did during this semester in terms of taking advantage of what the school was offering in terms of online courses, being in touch with the teacher, taking on new initiatives, reading new things that you never would have read in class. Those are the kinds of things teachers and their recommendations can really highlight to a college, can really help you in that situation. So to students and to parents of students, make sure your children stay in touch with their teachers over this next month and a half before school ends to be able to create that relationship and create that link. And also to make sure you ask them that you'd like them to write you a recommendation, because clearly that's key. Pick out 2 really good teachers that you have that relationship with. Essays, I think the essay this year could be more important than it's ever been before, because if kids are missing testing, kids are missing grades, kids are missing activities, how you express yourself in that essay is really going to be important. I think a classic topic is going to be, what did you do during the COVID-19? What did you do to make the world a better place? What did you do to make yourself a better student? What are your plans after this? What have you learned from this so that you will view the world perhaps in a different way in the years to come? I was talking to a student the other day and I mentioned, think about the lens that you observed COVID-19 through and how it impacted you in many different areas. And finally, I think the interview may become more important this year. I think as schools see that, okay, we don't have enough grades, we don't have scores, we want to talk to the student, we want to get to know them a little bit better, we want to get a sense of this interaction. So clearly, I think interviews, particularly for students who can't visit now with lots of the travel situations and the restrictions on campus, could become much, much more important. Remember, lots of liberal arts colleges used to interview in the summer, used to interview during the fall. That may not happen this year. And so as a result, the in-person interview may not work, but these are opportunities to take advantage of an electronic interview or any way that you can interact with the school.
Got it. Michael, that's great. Thank you so much for that, that context. So we're going to move forward here and start to talk about how to demonstrate interest in your research. And first off, wanted to give people just a little sense as to what we mean by this idea of demonstrated interest. And learning more about the school is not the only goal of college research, right? Equally important is this idea of demonstrating interest. Now, what does that actually mean? So demonstrated interest means a couple of things. So number one is the extent to which applicants have through specific measurable actions made clear their eagerness to attend a particular institution. And in addition, it's this idea of, showing that you've like fully researched the school, understand the school through this proactive activity, and you're able to express these ideas in your essays. And, another way to also demonstrate interest is obviously to apply sort of early decisions. So, we're talking about this idea of demonstrated interest. Would love to hear, what your ideas are in addition to what I've just said about what people need to know about this concept of demonstrated interest, Michael.
I mean, obviously the classic of demonstrated interest used to be, you would go up to campus, you would meet with people on campus, you do the information session, you do the tours, you'd have face-to-face interactions with the admission person at college fairs. All this spring, college fairs are all canceled. People are no longer having those kinds of opportunities to interact. Campuses are not open for tours or information sessions. So clearly what used to take place in face-to-face is no longer taking place. And so now we have to think about what are things that we can do now that are going to make a difference. Virtual events, the emails that you might send to an admission officer, and in particular what you're doing on social media. And social media. We'll talk a little bit more about that right now.
Gotcha. So so moving along here, again, obviously on-campus events we can't assume that they're going to have, students who have any opportunity for these. So this idea of doing a research line has become, more important than ever. So we're talking about this, in the past, and I find these stories about Slate really interesting. If people don't know what Slate is basically a CRM, so customer relationship management software. And, these are things that are often used, like Salesforce or Infusionsoft. These are tools that are used in sort of the commercial world. But, you've got some really interesting insights into how schools are using platforms like Slate. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Before I start, it's interesting to me that when I buy something and all of a sudden I start seeing that same company pops up in other situations where I'm online, because that's what Slate is on the college side. What Slate is, and it scared me a little bit, it was almost like Big Brother, what they're watching and what they can observe and what they can collect. A few years ago, I was down at Swanee, University of South, beautiful liberal arts college in the mountains of Tennessee. But they got to figure out how to attract students. So they were using a mechanism called Slate, and their dean of admissions walked me through it. I was fascinated. Basically, what takes place is every interaction you have with a school is going to be recorded on Slate. And what ends up happening is, for example, when we were talking about getting ready for your interview, all the information you're collecting and reading online, Slate is noticing that you're doing it. When a college reaches out to you and you respond, Slate records that. All these things in terms of virtual tours, virtual sessions that are going on, Slate is recording that. So all of a sudden you have this database that the school is piling up of the number of times you've been in contact with the school or looked at the school, and the school will see that as, this kid is really interested, versus the kid who looks one time and sends an application and there's really no relationship or contact with that school.
And I think it's really interesting how, some people might think of this as some, again, you said, Big Brother. It's actually, if you know about this, it's actually really helpful.
You can use it to your advantage. No question about it. Absolutely.
Right. And I'm wondering too, this year with the wait list, right? If there are schools that are maybe looking at this data more closely than ever to see who's really going to probably come to their school based on their data points.
It works both for seniors and for underclassmen right now. For someone who's been a senior, and just threw an application in, lots of times a school that may have been a safety for that student puts them on the wait list because they think they're not really interested in us. And then when they go back to Slate now and they see they really weren't interested in us, versus someone who might be an underclassman right now, who's really building a database so that a year from now, when colleges are looking at that, they're not going to put them on the wait list. They're going to accept them because they can see there's this genuine interest in the school.
Right. So why is demonstrated interest important? A couple of points here. This idea of yield, Michael, you want to talk about that?
Sure. I think we want to talk about who uses it. I think that's part of it, and liberal arts colleges like Swanee historically would use this because, number one, they have a smaller freshman class to pick from and to fill. So they want to make sure that the students that they're taking, they have a good chance of matriculating. So the concept of yield is very important. And again, that's what Slate will collect and show them. And many times, as we said before, that could be the thing that makes or breaks a student in terms of that genuine interest in that. I think larger universities, not as important, but for liberal arts colleges, clearly important. That being said, some larger universities will look at it. We talked yesterday about Michigan, the University of Michigan. You can tell a story about that yourself, Chris, in terms of what goes on. All these kids, again, Chris and I are very much in the New York market. All these kids from New York private schools in particular, and some of the bigger public schools, send applications to Michigan as kind of a safety, as someone that, oh, if I don't get into an Ivy, I'll get into Michigan, I'll be okay. Well, Michigan's onto that. Michigan is now trying to figure out who really is interested, who took the time to come out to campus, who is on our website, who's writing our essays in terms of our supplemental essays, really showing they've done the research about Michigan. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I've heard about a school that you have a relationship with, which is, Brown, is that Brown says they don't track demonstrated interest. Is that actually the case?
Yeah, I don't want to pick on Brown, but I think it's probably a common denominator in a lot of the Ivy League schools. Is because they feel like they're going to fill their class, tracking interest in terms of who's been on our website, who's come to campus isn't as important. Unfortunately, I think what they start to track is, did mom and dad go to school there? Are you connected with someone who is a significant donor to the school? Is there someone weighing in on your behalf? And sadly, I've seen kids be accepted that are clearly not as strong academically as other schools that other students at Ivy League schools have passed by. So I think demonstrated interest may also be sometimes who you know as well as what you actually did to demonstrate interest.
Got it. So how do I demonstrate interest? How do we actually do it? So these are some things that I have collected through different conversations with, again, mentors, best practices. So this idea of attending virtual events, emailing admissions officers, obviously learning more about how things like Slate work, and what might be sort of useful there, liking and following on social media, joining the mailing list. That always seems to be something that, people like you recommend. And then, we're going to give it a lot of other tips, really kind of beginning like right now. So do's and don'ts of virtual tours and info sessions. So here we go. Number one, be prepared. Obviously, you want to come with smart questions that you couldn't really find elsewhere, whether it's on the website or in the different marketing materials. Number two, take them seriously. So treat virtual events just like you would on-campus ones. And then three, if you register, obviously show up. Attendance and engagement will be tracked. Michael, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think in number two in particular, but actually all of them, number one, you want to come up with a relevant question that's going to be more specific to that school that shows you did some research on it. Number two, realize that a lot of these schools are recording these virtual sessions, and the ability to stand out, to show that you know about the school, to show that you care about the school are great opportunities. And finally, no question, if you sign up and don't show up, then all of a sudden you got a minus on Slack, not a plus on Slack.
Right.
Slate.
Right. So, and then, as far as things that we don't want to do, don't want to, again, ask basic questions. Again, if you can find it online, don't ask that. And also don't be a silent observer in these virtual tours and info sessions, engage and make yourself seen. Obviously you don't want to be obnoxious, but you want to actually engage and show that you were there and participating. And then also, don't only attend events with admissions officers. Student panels offer valuable, if not, the most valuable insight. Anything to add, Michael? Thoughts?
Absolutely. Number one, you're not going to ask how the food is. You're going to ask questions that really make a lot of sense. And if you're going to ask a dumb question, don't ask it. But I'm the silent observer. I can talk back to my days when I used to do live presentations at Brown. And there were many times that after the session was over, a student that just didn't shut up, I put a little notation to them that they really were obnoxious. And it was someone that I'm not sure I wanted in our community. So that's a very good point in terms of, being there, being part of it, but being kind of respectful of everybody else in that respect as well, too. And then finally, I was talking with one of my parents the other night, and they were talking about how much more valuable some of the student panels are that they've had an opportunity to be part of and to ask questions on. Let's remember that what the admissions office presents are the packaged programs from the school that they want you to see. Students many times, even though there may be an admission person watching them, perhaps are going to be a little more honest in their observations in terms of what they're going to talk about.
Right. So let's actually go into checklist for website research now. So these are things, again, I've collected through the years from, different sort of mentors and sort of gurus in college counseling. And, it's really like, these sort of 7 are, I think, sort of primary. And, whenever I feel like I'm talking to a college counselor like yourself, you're saying like, find like 2 things in each of these different sort of pieces that really resonate with you. And a lot of times it just starts with looking at the features of the academic philosophy. And you find that either in the about or in the academics. Sometimes they'll talk about it kind of in the mission. Also this idea of finding courses and professors who you're excited to be a part of their classes or to learn from. Also student organizations, which you can find under like say student life tabs. Also learning opportunities outside of classes. It's not just the classroom and the social scene. There's research institutes, there's innovation labs, there's also study abroad. There's a whole sort of bevy of different alternatives and opportunities to continue your learning outside the classroom in an applied or practical way. Also aspects of the local environment. Obviously being in New York City, you have access to the UN and to Wall Street. So what does that do? What does that afford you as far as learning experiences off campus? And then also the alumni networks, as well as the career services office, right? Where are the alumni where are they in the field? Where are they making impact? Where are they getting, gaining real traction? Also like the career services office is on campus. How good are they at setting you up with internships or job placement once you graduate from the university? And also, of course, aspects of the social life. I mean, Michael, anything to add to this? Any other insights as far as what
it's a great list, Chris, and it kind of sidesteps the other piece that lots of people. Do you want to be in a city or be out in the country? Do you want to be in a big school? Do you want to be in a small school?
Right, so geography.
Sure. Do you want to be at a school, for example, with big time football and big time basketball? I mean, you can get a great combination at Duke, where you get a great education and a great school, and be a Cameron crazy screaming at one of their basketball games. So a lot of these tie into exactly what you're saying. Every student should do kind of a self-evaluation of what's important to them. It falls into these 7 categories. If you don't want Greek life, the aspect of a social life. If you want Greek life, look at the kinds of things that are really important to you and make sure that they're offered. If you have a particular major, make sure the school has it. I mean, that's the bottom line in terms of that piece, So again, like I say, and think about, again, the academic philosophy. We talked many times about schools that have core curriculums and schools that have very open curriculums. These are important things that you think about what works for you and make sure they align when you go through these 7 principles that Chris posted.
Right, got it. Nice. And so, sort of recommended reading. Here's a couple of things, I call it, part 1 here. This is what they want you to know, right? Whoops, sorry. This is what they want you to know. Hello. Sorry. So the official admissions brochure, admissions FAQs on the website, admissions blogs, student life blogs. These are sort of rich sites for information. Particularly the student life blogs, maybe even like the FAQs, where they kind of drill down more specifically into questions that you might be asking yourself that's sort of beyond the marketing on the website. Anything else to add to this, Michael? Any insights on this?
I mean, these are really good, but again, remember what we said. This is what the school is producing for you to read, okay? Right. In other words, it is very, very structured and very, very in the vein of what they want you to see and what they want you to know. And sometimes you need to find a little bit of the dirty laundry about the school to make sure you're okay with that. This is not going to be on this sanitized version that these colleges are posting.
Right. And so to that point, this idea of, part 2, the vetting, right? Mm-hmm. Things that you want to read, the annual development and fundraising reports might be, they may have a few nuggets in there. Capital campaign websites, I find that when you're looking at anything related to development or the capital campaign, they're going to have, they're telling you what they want, what kind of vision they have for their class, their university in the future. Do you align with that, right? And then, one of the things that one of our team members at the company has said, which is read the undergraduate newspaper,
Mhm.
particularly the opinion pages. Talk about being unfiltered or dirty laundry, as well as other student publications. I mean, where else can people sort of vet the information that the school's pushing out, Michael?
I want to tell a story about number three. A couple of years ago, there was a school that was having students coming to campus for their kind of revisit days. And all of a sudden, there was a controversial article about some protests going on campus. The
Hmm.
admissions director had somebody run around campus and collect all the school newspapers so
Curious.
that
Oh, that's amazing.
the visiting students couldn't read about this. You can rest assured she didn't do well keeping her job. But number three to me is by far the most important. And fortunately, most schools have them online now, so no one can steal them and hide them from the students. So the value of that is you really get some insight, and you got to take it with a grain of salt. Students complain about things. There's no question about it. But it's important to get a tone of what the school is about, and many times how the school reacts, which is also going to be in the school papers. So I think these four are important, but I love the concept of making sure you take a look at the student newspaper.
Right. And of course, I mean, while it's not reading, it's also, there's another option out there, which is, talk to people who have gone to the school where they
Absolutely.
are now or have graduated recently, of course, right?
Yeah, there's no
So,
question. I mean, I think every high school will have a list of where their kids from previous classes have gone to and who have
yeah,
gone to those schools. Reach out to your
right,
guidance counselor and say, by the way, who else went to Colgate? I'd like to reach out and find out what their experience has been there.
right. So, on the theme of being social, do's and don'ts of social media. So, here are three do's. Number one, follow schools on social media. If you don't have one, consider making a LinkedIn account. I'll talk about that in a second. And then this idea of keeping it clean and professional. Everything on your profile should pass the grandma test. We don't want anything on there that grandma might be a little put off by. And then be careful who you follow. Don't follow or friend anyone whose post may reflect poorly on you. So a little story here on LinkedIn. So a student of mine who I worked with on testing in New York City, he recently was accepted to University of Southern California and got a presidential scholarship of over $100,000. Really great kid. He built a project and he had a whole sort of LinkedIn profile, and we knew exactly when schools were looking at him. He had a LinkedIn premium, which, it costs some money. Nevertheless, knowing that the schools that he was applying to were looking at him online and looking at his LinkedIn profile, that just gave us some information and he was able to do what he did with it. So, Michael, anything to add with that?
I think we have some on the next slide of what I want to talk about in particular.
Okay, well, without any further ado, the next slide. So some don'ts of social media. Waste the opportunity, right? Your profile is another chance to impress admissions officers. Use it. Don't ignore what you're tagged in, right? Don't let people tag you in inappropriate content. It's one thing to keep your own profile clean, but if there are other people that you're, connected with who are sharing things that won't pass the grandma test, let's, make sure that we're, their information not showing up on our feed. And then, finally, don't use an unprofessional email. Use your school email, not hot lips. Want to talk about hot lips a little bit, Michael?
Yeah, I want to tell a story. When I was at Poly Prep, that somebody that was an admission officer at a school called me and said, I want to let you know that one of your students sent me an email from her email account, and she was calling herself Hot Lips. He said, you might want to advise her to not use that in the future. But again, that tells you they're paying attention to these kinds of things and to think about it. It goes back to the grandma test, as we kept saying before. You don't want to be using anything that you'd be embarrassed for your grandmother to either see or read about, okay? So the key to me is be appropriate, be professional. The more that you can do that, admissions officers are going to notice that. And again, as you said, Chris, they are looking at your sites. Don't think that they aren't. When they're trying to really figure out, and particularly in this year coming up, when they're lacking grades and lacking scores and want to get to know you better, all the more reason they're going to spend more time with your social media accounts.
Right, right. So, we've got a lot of questions, Michael, on how to connect with colleges. So let's talk a little bit about that. So obviously, number one, it's about preparation. So complete your website research before you reach out to schools, and that's pretty basic. ask clarifying questions with live chat. It's, it's tracked. So when I say live chat, you might go onto a school website, there might be a little pop-up saying, hi, you have any questions or what's going on? I mean, there's a lot of different companies now that are incorporating these live chat, they're bots to start, but then they actually connect you to a school representative, sometimes the student. And that's also data that the school is going to be able to look at and track. And also, this idea of putting your best foot forward. Whenever you do connect with somebody, you don't want to waste anybody's time in doing it. Michael, anything to add to this, or?
Yeah, go back to that first point. I think what's important to realize is as you're doing your website research before you reach out, they're already tracking that. So in other words, they are seeing that you're looking at this information before you start to ask your questions. That's a good thing, okay? That's a good thing because it's showing you're doing your homework. You're looking at what you're looking to know about. You're looking at what you want to ask about. So that first point, lots of times you'd say, oh, I go on their website, no big deal. Well, it is a big deal, okay? And so again, the more often you go on, the more you look at it, the more you research it, and then the more that you do the other things Chris is talking about here in terms of the live chat and being in contact with others, the better.
Right. So as far as reaching out goes, there's been a few questions on how best to reach out to schools. Mm-hmm. And, number one, cast a wide net, aim to speak with admissions, students, and faculty. We had a couple of questions in the question field for the registration form, and people were asking, is it okay to do that? Absolutely. Absolutely. And then also make use of official opportunities. So some colleges arrange opportunities to speak with these people, take them up on it, including at the safe schools, your safety schools. And then finally, if no opportunities actually exist, try to create them, you have to be more proactive, right? Michael, anything to add to this?
Absolutely. This year I was working with a student who was very proficient in sign language, done some really cool things in it. And she reached out and started to reach out to the faculty members in sign language at the schools that she was interested in, developed a relationship. It helped her figure out which were good places for her, but it also built a relationship with those faculty members. Students who have particular majors and have the opportunity to do that, take advantage of that, no question about it. And number two, I think there are so many times students decide, and their parents, oh, it's a safe school, I don't need to do those same things. Those are the things that put you on a wait list. The fact that you didn't take the time to show the same love to your safety schools as you do to your target reach schools is a reality. So make sure that if you're doing this and you have a list of schools, you're not only doing it at your top 2 or 3 schools, but you're doing it at all the schools that you think are places that you'd like to attend.
Right. And, proactive steps, how do you actually do it? Well, contact admissions. Asked to speak with the representative or student ambassador. Oftentimes this is provided as an option. If not, you can always ask. Email professors to demonstrate that you've reviewed their class, or the research that they're doing, and you want to sort of discuss it further. And, in those cases, you want to somehow include in that message, what resonated with you, right? And again, you have to keep in mind, why should this person give you their time, right? You have to answer that question first. And then also finally here, speak with friends or contacts who are, enrolled or graduated, in recent years. Michael, any other sort of tips on how to actually proactively make this happen?
Yeah, I think we got to again think about the times we're in. In the past, a student would go to campus in the fall, they'd sit in on some classes. Lots of times they might go up and talk to the professor after the class. I'm not sure those opportunities are going to exist this fall. I mean, I think colleges are going to be a little more restrictive on who's on campus to visit, where they're coming from. I mean, we've seen instances where people coming from a particular country or even a particular state were discouraged from coming to campus. I think that will continue in the fall. So again, by doing it in terms of virtually reaching out to people, I think is going to be really important. And so realize what a college is going to allow you to do, and then also what you may have to do in terms of, as you said before, be proactive, because that's all you can do.
So, we talked about this idea of the interview and how the interview might be more important than ever, frankly. And, we had a couple of, sort of pieces here, this idea that if you're going to prepare for the interview, you have to really, really prepare for it. I know some of the other college counselors, who I'm friendly with, whenever the idea of the interview kind of comes up with their students, they're like, no, we have to talk before we, before you have that conversation with that school. And also too, this idea that even like an informational interview, because usually the interview is not evaluative until you actually apply, but even an informational interview, you want to make the most positive impression possible. Would you agree, Michael?
Absolutely. And as I've said earlier, today and in our last session, I really think in terms of, because there is less information for admission offices, they're going to probably prioritize interviews now more than they have in the past. And remember, it could be an admission officer, it could be an alumni, and sometimes it's even a student interviewer. But all of these can be of value. I love to tell one story though when I have this opportunity. Years ago when I was in poly prep, I believed that I should do practice interviews with my students to pretend I was the dean from a particular school and take them through a series of questions that I've asked them. One of my favorite questions was always, what have you read lately? And one of the students I was doing the practice interview with said, I don't like to read. And I kind of fell out of my chair. And
good reason.
Then I collected myself and I said, you're leaving now, you're coming back tomorrow, and we're going to do this again, and you better have a better answer for that question the next day. And sure enough, he did. I'm sure he got home and he said, I can't believe what Mr. Muska said and did. And the mother said, you're damn straight that he should have done that to you. I can't believe you answered the question that way. But again, it's back to preparation. I'm a firm believer. Do practice interviews. You can even do it with mom and dad. It doesn't have to be with an admission person. But do a practice interview just to get that experience of what it's like in terms of that give and take. Because again, I think these information interviews are going to be much more important this year in particular, maybe not the next year, but I think for this upcoming year, schools are going to have to figure out how to collect more information about you, whether it's checking your social media, doing an interview, but things that they haven't done as much in the past.
Right. So Q&A, we got quite a number of questions that were submitted that we're going to take a look at. But again, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A panel, sort of in your Zoom interface. And what I'm going to do right now is we've sort of organized some of these questions into themes. And Michael, there's a lot of questions kind of coming in about this idea of culture and fit. Mm-hmm. How exactly does one sort of figure out what the right fit is? What does fit really mean? And how do you go about assessing what the culture or the vibe is of a campus when we're researching schools online?
I have to say that this is one of the toughest things right now in terms of not being able to go to campus. I mean, you and I both know kids that pulled up to campus in their car, stepped out of the car and said, Mom, Dad, let's get back in the car. I have no interest in this place, And there are other kids that learned to love a school that they didn't know was going to be the right place for them. And that really happened when they had that tour, when they had that interaction. This is going to be a tough one. I wish to say there was a magic answer. I hope schools reopen in the fall. You get a chance to go back and see these kinds of things. But you got to get a feel for the school. You got to get a feel for whoever you're able to interact. And I think back to what we talked before about interacting with students that are there, interacting with reading the school paper. Get a sense of feeling of the culture of the school. Is it something that I feel like I'm going to be comfortable with? I wish I could say easy. It's not. This is possibly the hardest question you can possibly ask right now in light of what we're all going through.
Well, just to add to that, and this is not going to come as a surprise to most people, but my feeling is that the best way to get a sense of the culture of the school is to connect with the people. Mm-hmm. It's really, they're the lifeblood of that campus, whether it's it's Brown or Michigan State or or Albright College. It's always the people. So the more that you can do to connect with the people, I agree. That's going to probably be the best way to kind of gauge, because at the end of the day, a campus is mainly architecture and landscaping. Right?
I want to add one more thing to this. And Chris, you and I have talked about this. I think asking people, students in particular, how did the school handle the pandemic? In other words, what was communicated to you? How did they treat you? How did they handle you? What was their sensitivity in terms of what's coming forward? Those are kinds that will give you really insight into the culture and the nature of the humanity and what a school is all about. And I think that that's easily a question you can ask And you can you can tell who's kind of hemming and hawing when they answer, and you can also tell who's very sincere and direct in terms of how they answer.
Well, to that point, just in your own opinion, are there some schools out there that you feel like are doing a particularly good job at handling the crisis?
I don't know if this is the place where we kind of do that, Chris, I guess in terms of, but I think it's very obvious, when you're hearing certain schools aren't refunding, they're not giving a refund to the kids, who had to go home. Schools that immediately kick students off campus without any sensitivity to individual situations. Schools that are not paying attention to the financial aid package needs of the kid this coming year because mom and dad lost their jobs. Very easy to find these things out, but I don't want to kind of like label schools.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Just the fact that you gave us those types of.
We both have friends in some of these schools. We want to be careful to kind of not offend. Okay.
Well, nevertheless, just being able to kind of search those different pieces, that's pretty helpful. And for whatever it's worth, I haven't come across schools that have done that. So I feel like I'd be hearing about it if it was.
Oh yes.
So it sounds like schools. My impression is that all kidding aside, my impression is that for the most part, schools are doing a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, I do. I also think a lot of it is how students felt about their online education. In other words, some schools have done it far better than others, and getting a sense that the schools that paid particular attention in terms of the classes they had to put online and how they did it and how well they stayed, kept the communication up with students, I think is absolutely key in understanding how the schools reacted to this.
Right. This is a question that kind of came in, which I found kind of interesting. If you're struggling, it builds off of culture and fit. If you're struggling to work out which school is your top choice, ED or EA, how do you choose? What do you have to say about that?
Again, it goes back to what we said before. I feel it's difficult to do an ED school you've never seen, but international students do it all the time. Okay. Right. So they figured out a way to do it in terms of getting a real insight. In many ways, I think that what we're going through right now for domestic students is in many cases what international students have been doing for a long time. They've been learning about the school through virtual tours, through outreaches, the kinds of things we're talking about. So it's kind of like a brave new world for our American kids this year in terms of understanding how that works. But I think if you've done your homework, you've done your research, you've seen the fit, you can make a decision whether this is a school that I feel is a good choice for me. If you're not ready to, then go EA, okay? Remember, November 1st comes around, there's a number of schools you can go EA to, don't do ED. I think it's also going to be interesting to see what even goes on with ED and EA as this year progresses. Will admissions offices push their deadlines back? Who knows what's going to happen in terms of, if the school doesn't open until October 1st, which some schools are talking about, are they going to have a November 1 deadline? I don't know. And again, that's why sessions that we're going to be doing in the next couple of months will really be helpful in terms of helping families understand the ongoing process.
Well, your comment about moving the deadlines, or would they move the deadlines? I think back to a story that you once told me about how even now dealing with the crisis, all these schools got their decisions out on time.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
so
there's no question. When the end of March came around and all the Ivies had to get all their decisions out for thousands and thousands of applicants, they got out. And now May 1st is coming. And schools are going to go back into session, admissions offices. They're going to look at their numbers. They're going to figure out what they're going to do with their wait list. And one comment on that I wanted to add today. I had a student the other day ask me, if I get off the wait list, I want to ask for a deferral. Schools that are going to go to their wait list right now are looking to fill spaces. Bottom line, okay? No question about it. So I think if you are admitted off a wait list and ask for a deferral, you probably might lose that option.
Got it. So I'm going to go to the submitted questions in the Q&A for the session right now. And we have a question here from
Chris,
Wendy.
can I add one more thing before we go on? Again, this is something that I think is going to come up. I'm reading a lot from different schools right now talking about opening in the fall. And they're discussing the concept that large lecture classes may continue to be online. Yes. And then they would come together in a small group session for personal one-on-one. And I don't think that that's a terrible thing, okay? There's a part of me that if I had the option to go to a Harvard or a Yale or a Princeton and my large session is going to be in that format, yet I'm still going to get the opportunity to be together. I think that's important to think about. I think a lot of families right now are questioning, do I spend this kind of money if all we're going to have is online classes? It really depends on what kind of online classes you have. A large lecture can be taught with an online class. An intimate or personal give and take session, as long as schools are doing those, and a lot of schools are saying, we're going to be able to do this because we can space out students in those kinds of classroom settings.
So what you're saying is, if I understand it correctly, is that if it's like a large lecture, they'll do it through some sort of, virtual, some sort of remote learning platform, video conferencing, Zoom, whatever. But then they might bring students together for more like a seminar style or like a tutorial style. Yeah.
And that's what schools have been doing forever. The only difference is the lecturer has been up front and lectures to the big collective group, and then they meet once a week to discuss what was discussed in the big lectures. The only difference is now it might be done virtually instead of in person.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. That's really interesting. So yeah, again, here, Wendy's question is, in terms of recommendations, what do you think of current juniors asking teachers who they had sophomore year as opposed to their junior year?
It's good. It's a very interesting question. I think ideally, if it's a sophomore teacher, you might have senior year, terrific, okay? Because a lot of schools have that scenario. You might have had a teacher for a full year and then have that teacher for an elective senior year. I still think there's some real value in the junior teacher who watched you use the spring of junior year, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
that to me is going to sell something to a college about a kid. The kid that took that initiative, that stayed proactive, that did all the work, did more than the work. Those are the kinds of things that's going to resonate with an admission office. So I'm not going to disagree that you can't use a sophomore teacher, but I think the idea of really taking advantage of a junior teacher who really saw something in you that you, when you had an opportunity, took advantage of it, that's going to be a powerful letter.
Right. So sort of further to that, we have a question here from Aaliyah. Aaliyah's question is, some of my students have been depending on this year to boost up their GPA, but with the skewed grading this year, that didn't happen. How forgiving do you feel colleges will be with grades? Will there be more weight on the essay?
We've talked about this through the whole session. Colleges have to be more forgiving this year in terms of grading systems. You're absolutely right. This was the perfect year. We always say, you and I have said this for years, junior year is the most important year in the college admissions process. A lot of students lost half of their junior year. How do you make up for that? It's not going to be reflected probably in your GPA. So again, the power of an essay, the power of an interview, the power of those recommendations, the more that you can have other things in your application to strengthen it, because schools know what kids were going through. They're going to know that GPAs can't be affected in terms, and they're probably not going to put a whole lot of credibility in GPAs that jump because these kids weren't sitting in classrooms with teachers anyways.
Right. So, interesting question. This is from Suhani. Will there be fly-ins this year? And I think what Suhani is referring to is this idea of fly-in reimbursements.
Well, I think, the problem again is going to be, we've got to find out, she's asking the unknown, unfortunately. We don't know yet, okay? And part of the premise of fly-ins is for oftentimes students of color, students who are less represented, that colleges bring them in as a recruitment process. And I have to believe that, offices of diversity still want diversity on their campuses. So they're going to have to find out ways to do that. It could be that they do a lot more virtual outreach as opposed to fly-ins. Hopefully there will be fly-ins. But for students, in the past, they used to do fly-ins in the early fall, so those kids would apply on November 1st ED. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I don't think the calendar and what's going on in this country right now is going to allow that to happen.
Right. Well, we've answered all the questions that were in the submitted Q&A, and we've sort of attended to most of the questions that were applied to the general sort of audience. But there's one question here that I've been sort of saving, and I think it's a beautiful question. As a parent, I plan on helping my son make decisions by taking trips to colleges. Now, since all is virtual, Michael, what is the role of the parent with online school research?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've worked with students, and who some of them are too, who basically wanted mom and dad to stay out of the whole process. They wanted to do it all themselves. They wanted to micromanage it. They wanted to do all the things, they went to visit without mom and dad, did all those kinds of things. I've always been opposed to that. I always think that it's a family decision. It's a team. Most times mom and dad are going to pay the bills, so we're in a situation that you should all be in it together in terms of that discussion. And I have always been an advocate, particularly non-working moms, but now lots of times, unfortunately, there's going to be some non-working dads, help with the research. Remember that when you go onto the website, Slate is going to record that the family has reached out to do research. So whether it's mom, dad, or the student, that's going to be a plus for the student. So if you want to double your contacts with the school, use mom and dad to help do that, as well as the student doing that, okay? Let the student, however, I can remember a time when I was at Brown and I came down to meet a student and his mother. They were standing at the bottom of the stairs. I said, okay, I'm ready for your interview. And the mother said, okay, we're ready for our interview too. And I said, no, mom, not you, him. And I think that you have to it goes back to the concept you made before about virtual tours and obnoxious. It's like, parents, know your role, be helpful, be supportive, help your student find that fit. Help your student find those different things. If a student can't find something, maybe you'll find it, okay? And share it with them. But parents should be involved in this process. I'm a firm believer in that. I've always believed in that. I've always been an advocate for the student first, but it's a team effort in terms of us all working together.
It's a beautiful message, because I've certainly seen how the college process can actually bring families so much closer together.
Absolutely.
A student of mine out on Long Island, sort of quick story. I was working with her on testing, and she came in end of sort of freshman year, early sophomore year. It was early in the process, comparatively speaking. And the first meeting with the family was incredibly tense. Mm-hmm. Daughter, father, other sides of the table. And this girl was on the verge of tears the entire hour that we were talking. And it was not good. Mm-hmm. Fast forward a couple of years, and I got a phone call from them together when she was accepted early decision at UPenn, her number one choice school. And it was as if, it was night and day. It was 180-degree difference. And it was a beautiful, beautiful sort of illustration of what the process can do when you go about it the right way.
One of my favorite stories, and Chris, you live in Maine, so I love to tell this story, is I say to families, go up to Maine, eat a lobster, go shop at L.L. Bean, and take a look at Bowden and Bates. It's like, make it a kind of family experience that you can enjoy. Can't do that right now. Hopefully, as the fall progresses, we will be able to do that as we get back to a degree of normalcy. But again, you should all be involved together as a team in terms of this. Yes.
100%, Michael, 100%. So there have not been any more submitted questions. So, Michael, if there's one thing that you think people should know about online research, what would the theme be?
Big Brother is watching.
I thought you were going to say that.
So I think the important thing, but again, as you said it before, Chris, use it to your advantage, okay? In other words, have that clean LinkedIn profile, have that clean social media profile, do your homework in terms of reaching out to the schools, in terms of all aspects of it, so that they know you're looking at them. Those are the kinds of things that where someone watching you, you're controlling that they know they're watching you, but you know what they're seeing. So again, it's kind of a turnaround of the Big Brother concept in some ways, because you want them to know you're excited, you want them to know you're interested, and you want them to know it's a high choice of yours.
Right. And I'll just sort of follow that up with, when the spotlight is on, you've got two choices. You can run away or you can perform. And Michael, I think that's exactly what you're saying. The spotlight is on, so it's time to perform.
And I'd also say one last thought too. You still got a couple months of what's going on right now.
Sure.
Think about what you can do right now to enhance the fact that you've taken something proactive. I was talking to a student the other night, and her resume was a little thin, and she's talked about, well, I cook for meals for my grandmother, and I cook meals for my great aunt, and I said, and I take them to them. I said, do that to a few other people, okay? And all of a sudden, you're showing that you're taking the opportunity of what you're able to do in this circumstance, but going out to help others. And I think there's still plenty of time. It's still only May 1st. We're going to be in this situation for at least a couple more months. Plenty of time to do something and to think about what you're going to do this summer, because you might not be able to have a camp. You might not be able to do some of the things you used to do in the past. What else can you do instead?
Well, I will, to kind of help close out our session, I will give you a Maine camp summer update because I've been getting a lot of questions about it.
Yeah.
So Governor Mills rolled out her plan literally yesterday. And as of right now, if you're planning on coming to Maine for sleepaway camp and you're living outside of Maine, well, you're going to have to quarantine for 14 days when you cross the state border. So if you think you're going to sleepaway camp on July 1st, you got to come on June 15th and self-isolate, self-quarantine, and then go to the camp. And that's if the camp will even be open, which I don't think is going to happen.
Yeah. So, and I had another family mention to me that some of the counselors at the camp that their daughter worked at are international students.
Almost all of them.
That's not going to happen this year. These international kids are not going to get into the country to be counselors. I mean, it's the bottom line. Times have changed, but that may create opportunities for domestic students to do something that they wouldn't have done because they didn't have that opportunity before. Who knows, Take advantage of the situation as much as you can.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time today. Again, for our audience, our viewing audience, we do have, Michael's information up. If you're interested in connecting with him, you're always welcome to call us at the Cates team. And on behalf of Michael and the Cates team, we wish you all, luck and success in the process.
And remember, we'll be back again. Okay.
And we'll be back at some point. So have a great day. Thank you for participating and stay safe.